And I think that's what we're going to be seeing as this conflict continues, as Russia continues to um, defeat the Ukrainian military, drive them back, as Russia achieves its borders. Um, Russia will continue the assault into what Russia acknowledges to be Ukrainian territory to establish buffer zones. Russia will never again allow Ukraine the opportunity to fire shells from Ukrainian soil that impact Russia. Putin's warned about this from the very beginning, and this is the reality. Welcome to Russian negotiations 101. The Russians have said that whatever happens on the negotiating table, it has to be related to the reality on the ground. And the reality on the ground is that the Russian terms are quite specific. The totality of constitutional Russia will be Russian. There's no negotiation. There's no, territorial swap. There's no holding on to a piece of Russia to get this. All of Russia is Russia, and all of Russia includes Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Lugansk, and Crimea, and Kursk, by the way. And at the end of the day, once this territory is, there will be a demilitarized zone in Ukraine, and only Ukraine. Russia will not demilitarize. I don't know what anybody else thinks is going to happen, but Russian troops will be on Russian soil. There will be no pulling back. There will be no. Yet Russia will protect Russia. Ukraine, the defeated nation, will have to make these concessions. It's just the reality of it. And the longer Ukraine holds out, the more stark the reality will become. But Russia's not doing this to get the upper hand at the negotiating table. These military operations were defined by military objectives that were established by Russia well before the current round of negotiations began. And Russia's been consistent from day one as to what these objectives are. Neutrality for Ukraine, demilitarization, denazification. End of story.
This is not just a war, it's a statement, a declaration that Russia will carve its own reality into the battlefield, regardless of diplomacy, regardless of negotiations. Moscow isn't interested in ceasefires or compromise. It seeks absolute control, a security buffer forged through relentless military pressure. Ukraine is not just losing ground. It is being reshaped by force, with every passing day drawing the map closer to Russia's vision. Now that we've dissected Scott Ritter's latest statements, let's pivot to an explosive development in the geopolitical landscape, one that has sent shockwaves through Ukraine, Russia, and beyond. Donald Trump, in a move that has stunned analysts and governments alike, has made a bold proposal regarding Ukraine's nuclear power plants. This development isn't just about energy, it's about control, influence, and a potential power shift in the ongoing war. At the same time, Russia is pushing forward on the battlefield, pressing its advantage while the world watches with bated breath. Let's break it all down. Trump's shocking proposal, seizing control of Ukraine's nuclear power plants. In a stunning revelation, it has been confirmed that U.S. President Donald Trump held a critical phone call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The conversation, lasting approximately an hour, covered a broad range of topics. But one issue stood out above all others: control over Ukraine's nuclear and electric power infrastructure. This call comes just days after Trump had an extensive 2.5-hour conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The stark difference in duration has raised eyebrows. Why did Trump devote significantly more time to Russia than Ukraine? This alone suggests a deeper alignment with Moscow's interests than many had previously suspected. Reports indicate that Trump's discussions with Zelensky built upon the conversation he had with Putin. His aim? To align Russia and Ukraine's demands in a way that could serve as the foundation for a broader agreement. But while peace talks would be an obvious diplomatic objective, what stands out is the economic and strategic ambition behind Trump's proposed deal. According to sources familiar with the negotiations, Trump has floated the idea that the United States should manage Ukraine's nuclear power plants, including the highly contested Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, ZNPP, the largest in Europe. The reasoning behind this? Trump reportedly believes that American ownership or operational control of these facilities would be the best means of safeguarding Ukraine's critical energy infrastructure while simultaneously ensuring a stable revenue stream for the United States. If this proposal sounds audacious, it's because it is. Under international law, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant belongs to Ukraine. However, Russia has effectively seized control of the facility, arguing that it now falls under Russian jurisdiction. This tug of war over ZNPP has turned the plant into both a battlefield and a political flashpoint, with each side accusing the other of reckless behavior and sabotage attempts. A deal of global consequence. Trump's proposal isn't just about Ukraine. It could have far-reaching implications for global energy markets. Under this plan, the U.S. would operate the nuclear facility and sell electricity to both Ukraine and Russia. Both nations, according to the deal, would pay the United States for energy, a lucrative arrangement that, if implemented, could redefine how wartime economies function. However, there's an even bigger catch. Russia is expected to counter this proposal with a demand of its own: Nord Stream. The Kremlin is well aware of the economic power these negotiations hold, and Moscow has signaled that if Trump expects the U.S. to oversee Zaporizhzhia, then Russia would require the U.S. to ensure the security and operation of the Nord Stream pipelines. For context, Nord Stream, the set of pipelines connecting Russian gas to Europe, has been a geopolitical lightning rod, particularly after sections of the infrastructure were sabotaged. If Trump were to accept such a counteroffer, it would mean the U.S. guaranteeing Russian gas exports to Europe in exchange for control over Ukrainian nuclear energy production. It's a massive, high-stakes gamble, one that could redraw economic lines in Eastern Europe while simultaneously shifting the balance of power in the energy sector. Zelensky's stance? A dangerous precedent? At first glance, one might assume that Zelensky would reject such a proposal outright. After all, why would Ukraine cede control of its most important energy assets to the U.S.? However, shockingly, reports indicate that Zelensky has signaled a willingness to go along with Trump's plan, under certain conditions. One of those conditions strikes on Russian energy assets. In what appears to be a coordinated effort to apply pressure, Zelensky has allegedly agreed to target Russian energy infrastructure, a move that could further escalate the war. This suggests a dangerous precedent. Ukraine may be willing to accept partial American control over its nuclear facilities if, in return, the U.S. supports military strikes on Russian energy networks. If this is indeed the case, then the entire war could shift from a territorial conflict to a full-blown battle for energy dominance. Putin's countermove, a demand for recognition. While these negotiations are unfolding, Russia is not sitting idly by. A new report from Moscow reveals that Putin has laid out his own terms: formal recognition of all 4 occupied Ukrainian regions as Russian territory. This includes Donetsk People's Republic, DPR, Luhansk People's Republic, LPR, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson. In return, Putin has hinted that Russia would not seek further territorial expansion into Ukraine. This offer is deeply revealing. It suggests that Putin may be willing to lock in his gains and negotiate peace if he secures official recognition of these territories. However, this is a massive red line for Ukraine. Zelensky has repeatedly insisted that occupied territories are non-negotiable. Ukraine's official position remains firm. The country will only accept a full restoration of its 1991 borders. So, what does this mean? A diplomatic impasse. Both sides have their own red lines, and unless one of them is willing to budge, or be forced to, this war will continue. Meanwhile, the war rages on. While high-level negotiations are taking place, the battlefield tells a different story. Russia continues its advance, making slow but steady territorial gains. The most intense fighting is taking place in the Zaporizhzhia region, precisely where Trump's nuclear plant deal is centered. Over the past 24 hours, Russian forces bombed a Ukrainian ammunition train, reportedly destroying a critical supply line that Kyiv had hoped to use for reinforcement. Ukrainian forces launched a large-scale drone attack on the Russian city of Engels, targeting key military facilities, including an airfield used to launch missile strikes against Ukraine. A Ukrainian F-16 fighter jet was allegedly shot down by Russian air defense systems, marking a significant escalation in air combat. The battlefield remains fluid, with neither side achieving a decisive breakthrough. However, Russia's advances in Zaporizhzhia suggest a long-term plan to fortify its hold over the region, particularly as Trump's nuclear negotiations continue in the background. What happens next? With all these developments, one thing is certain: energy is now at the center of this war. If Trump's proposal gains traction, it could fundamentally reshape the conflict. not just in terms of territorial control, but in terms of economic power. Will Ukraine agree to partial American control over its nuclear plants in exchange for military assistance? Will Russia force the U.S. into a broader energy agreement involving Nord Stream? Can peace be achieved if neither side is willing to compromise on territorial recognition? These questions remain unanswered, but one thing is clear. The war in Ukraine is no longer just about land. It's about power, energy power, nuclear power, and geopolitical power. The coming weeks could define the future of this conflict in ways no one expected.